People think a second chance at life means you get to fix your biggest regrets. For Kalen Wren, it began with opening his eyes in a bedroom that wasn't his. The ceiling was enormous. Crystal chandeliers hung above him. Silk curtains covered floor-to-ceiling windows. And beside the bed sat a mirror reflecting a handsome young Omega he had never seen before. Kalen touched his face. The reflection did the same. His blood ran cold. Then memories crashed into his mind. Astor Vale, the spoiled husband of Lucien Moretti, the most feared Mafia alpha in the city. Kalen remembered the novel immediately. He had read it the night before dying. Astor was arrogant, wasteful, jealous, and cruel. He spent Lucien's money without restraint, humiliated servants, interfered with Mafia business, and threatened to expose Lucien whenever he didn't get what he wanted. Lucien eventually divorced him. Then Astor died mysteriously. Kalen swallowed. No. He looked toward the bedroom door. I know this story. The door suddenly opened. A tall man entered wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. Cold silver eyes, sharp features, an intimidating presence that made the entire room seem smaller. Lucien Moretti. Kalen's heart nearly stopped. Lucien looked at him. You wanted the new car delivered this morning. Kalen blinked. What car? Lucien frowned. The one you demanded yesterday. Kalen remembered. $200,000. The original Astor had threatened to destroy an executive's career unless Lucien bought it. Lucien folded his arms. You're not going to complain? Kalen thought for a moment. Cancel it. Silence. Lucien stared at him. You spent $200,000 on that car. Then cancel it. Lucien's expression became suspicious. Why? Kalen smiled nervously. Because I don't need it. The Mafia boss stared at his husband as though he'd suddenly started speaking another language. Kalen quietly looked away. He knew exactly what happened next in the novel. Astor would continue behaving badly. Lucien would lose patience. And eventually, Astor would die. Kalen clenched his hands beneath the blanket. He had no intention of following that script. If this world wanted him to be the villain, he would become the one person who survived long enough to rewrite the ending. By breakfast, the entire Moretti mansion knew something was wrong with Astor Vale. The servants stood silently as Kalen entered the dining room. Normally, Astor would have complained about the food before taking a single bite. Today, he smiled. Good morning. Several servants exchanged nervous glances. One young maid nearly dropped a tray. Kalen frowned. Did I scare you? She immediately shook her head. No, sir. Kalen realized why. The original Astor had never spoken gently to the staff. He had fired people for tiny mistakes. Kalen felt a wave of guilt that wasn't entirely his. I'm sorry. The dining room became completely silent. The maid stared at him. Kalen picked up his spoon. You don't have to be afraid of me. Nobody answered. Across the table, Lucien watched him carefully. He hadn't touched his breakfast. Kalen noticed. What? Lucien narrowed his eyes. What are you planning? Nothing. You're being unusually pleasant. Kalen almost laughed. Is that a crime? With you, apparently. Lucien's mouth twitched. Kalen noticed the almost smile. Interesting. After breakfast, he returned to the bedroom and opened Astor's closet. Designer clothes filled every shelf, expensive watches, jewelry, shoes he'd never wear. Kalen stared at everything. Then he remembered the novel. Astor had spent millions of Lucien's money trying to compete with other Omegas. Kalen immediately called the household manager. Return everything purchased in the last month. The manager looked horrified. Everything? Everything. Sir, that includes the diamond necklace. Return it. The watches. Return them. The imported sports car? Definitely. The manager stared at him as though he had lost his mind. Kalen smiled. I've changed my mind. Later that afternoon, Kalen passed Lucien's private office. He stopped at the doorway. May I come in? Lucian looked up from his documents. His expression was unreadable. You don't usually ask. I know. Lucian studied him. What do you want? Nothing. Then why are you here? Kalen smiled. I was just passing by. He turned to leave. Then Lucian spoke. Aster. Kalen stopped. Yes? Lucian's eyes narrowed. Who are you? Kalen's heart skipped. For one terrifying second, he wondered if Lucian could somehow see through the transmigration. Then Lucian added quietly, My husband has never apologized to servants. Kalen smiled awkwardly. Maybe he should have. He walked away. Behind him, Lucian remained completely still. For the first time, the ruthless Mafia boss wasn't wondering what his husband wanted. He was wondering what had happened to him. And somewhere in the mansion, someone else was asking the same question. By the third day, Kalen had discovered something far more dangerous than the Mafia boss's enemies. Lucian Moretti was terrible at receiving compliments. It happened during breakfast. Lucian entered wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, his dark hair neatly styled, his expression as intimidating as ever. Kalen looked up. You look handsome today. Lucian stopped, completely. The spoon in his hand remained suspended above his plate. One of the servants immediately looked down. Kalen blinked. Are you okay? Lucian slowly sat. Eat your breakfast. Kalen frowned. That wasn't an answer. I'm fine. But his ears were slightly red. Kalen stared. Then he smiled. Interesting. The most feared alpha in the city was blushing. He decided to test it. A few minutes later, Lucian reached for his coffee. Kalen casually said, Your suit smells nice. Lucian inhaled at exactly the wrong moment. He coughed. The servant pouring tea nearly smiled. Lucian glared at him. Leave! The servant hurried away. Kalen covered his mouth. Are you embarrassed? No. You are. I'm not. Kalen laughed. Lucian's expression became darker. You're enjoying this. Very much. Lucian looked away. Kalen couldn't stop smiling. This man was nothing like the emotionless character described in the novel, or perhaps the novel had simply never shown this side of him. Over the following weeks, their relationship changed in small ways. Lucian began joining Kalen for breakfast. Kalen stopped being afraid of his cold expression. They argued about movies. They disagreed about food. Once, Kalen caught Lucian secretly watching a ridiculous romantic comedy. You like this? Lucian immediately turned off the television. No. You watched 40 minutes. I was investigating. Investigating romance? Lucian stared at him. Kalen burst out laughing. For the first time, Lucian smiled. It was brief, almost invisible. But Kalen saw it. And something warm settled inside his chest. He was beginning to forget that Lucian was supposed to be a character. He was becoming a real person to him, someone he cared about. That frightened Kalen more than anything, because he remembered the ending. Aster was supposed to die. Lucian was supposed to become colder, and everything they were building was supposed to disappear. One night, Kalen stood alone beside the bedroom window. He whispered, I can't let the story happen. Behind him, the door opened. Lucian stood there. You look worried. Kalen turned. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then he smiled. Nothing. But Lucian knew immediately. Kalen was hiding something, and soon. He intended to find out what. Kalen couldn't sleep. Lucian's question kept repeating in his mind. Who are you? He had no answer he could safely give. So instead, he returned to the one thing he knew better than anyone. The original story. Aster's death had always been described as mysterious. The novel never revealed who killed him. But Kalen remembered the chapters surrounding it. There had been one person who constantly encouraged Aster's worst behavior, Dorian Moretti, Lucian's younger brother. Dorian had always appeared charming in the novel, helpful, protective, almost innocent. But Kalen remembered one detail. Whenever Astor caused trouble, Dorian was somehow nearby. He encouraged extravagant purchases. He gave Astor access to questionable substances, and he secretly recorded Astor's angry outbursts. Kalen began searching through Astor's old phone. He found dozens of messages. "You deserve better. Lucien doesn't appreciate you. Make him regret ignoring you." The sender was Dorian. Kalen's stomach tightened. Astor hadn't simply become spoiled. Someone had been feeding his worst instincts. Then he found something worse. A folder containing photographs. Astor shouting at servants. Astor breaking expensive objects. Astor arguing with Lucien. Every incident had been documented. Someone was building a case against him. Kalen's blood ran cold. The original Astor had been made to look unstable. And once Lucien divorced him, whoever controlled those records could make his death look like a consequence of his own behavior. That afternoon, Dorian visited the mansion. He smiled warmly. "Brother." Then he looked at Kalen. "Still behaving yourself?" Kalen smiled. "Trying." Dorian laughed. "I heard you've stopped shopping." "Yes." "Stopped threatening servants?" "Yes." "Stopped causing problems?" Kalen tilted his head. "Am I disappointing you?" Dorian's smile disappeared for half a second, then returned. "Of course not." Kalen stepped closer. "I think you're disappointed." Dorian's eyes narrowed. Kalen whispered, "I know what you did." Dorian froze. "What?" "You encouraged Astor." Silence. "You made him reckless." "You recorded everything." Dorian's expression hardened. "You think becoming nicer changes anything?" Kalen smiled. "No." He stepped closer. "Knowing what happens next does." For the first time, Dorian looked genuinely afraid. Kalen walked away, but he didn't see the anger in Dorian's eyes, because Dorian had just realized something terrifying. The spoiled husband he had controlled for years was no longer under his control. The charity gala was exactly as Kalen remembered. Crystal chandeliers, expensive suits, dozens of powerful families, and enough Mafia members hidden among the guests to start a war. Kalen remembered this night from the novel. Astor had been supposed to drink a glass of champagne. Minutes later, he would collapse. His death would be blamed on suicide. Kalen wasn't going to let that happen. He stood beside Lucien as servers moved through the ballroom. Lucien leaned closer. "You're unusually quiet." "I'm thinking." "About?" Kalen looked at the champagne in his hand. "Survival." Lucien frowned. Before he could ask more, Dorian approached. "Brother." Then he smiled at Kalen. "Enjoying the evening?" Kalen smiled back. "Very much." A server approached with another glass. Kalen watched carefully. The drink meant for him was placed directly into his hand. He remembered the novel, the poison. Without hesitation, Kalen switched glasses with the one beside him. Dorian's eyes flickered. Kalen noticed. Interesting. Dorian picked up the glass he believed belonged to Kalen. He drank. Seconds later, his face changed. He stumbled. The ballroom erupted. Lucien immediately grabbed Kalen. "Are you hurt?" Kalen looked at him. "No." Lucien's hands remained firmly around his shoulders. His expression was terrifying. "Someone tried to poison you." Kalen smiled softly. "You were worried about me?" Lucien froze. The anger in his eyes disappeared. Something much more vulnerable replaced it. Terrified. Kalen's heart skipped. Lucien looked at him as though he had forgotten everyone else existed. "I thought—" He stopped. Kalen touched his cheek. "You thought what?" Lucien swallowed. "I thought I was going to lose you." The words were barely audible. Kalen's teasing smile disappeared. He had expected Lucien to care. He hadn't expected fear. Security surrounded Dorian. Medical teams rushed toward him. The evidence was overwhelming, but Kalen couldn't celebrate. Because another memory had surfaced, the novel's next major event. Dorian wasn't supposed to kill Lucian. Someone else was. Within weeks, rival Mafia families would organize an assassination. Lucian would be shot at an abandoned warehouse. He would die. Kalen stared at the man beside him. Lucian was still holding his hand. He looked completely unaware that his death had already been written. Kalen tightened his grip. Not this time. The story had already taken one life. It wasn't taking Lucian's. For several seconds, Lucian said nothing. The warehouse was still filled with the echoes of gunfire. But Kalen heard only his own heartbeat. I knew your story before I ever became part of it. Lucian stared at him. What does that mean? Kalen struggled to answer. How could he explain that he had died in another world? That Lucian had once been nothing more than a character in a novel? That Kalen had woken up inside the body of a man who was supposed to die? I don't know how to explain it. Lucian's expression softened. Try. Kalen looked down. I wasn't supposed to be Aster. Lucian frowned. Then who are you? Kalen. The name felt strange leaving his lips. My name is Kalen Wren. Lucian remained silent. Kalen continued. I woke up in this body after I died. I knew things that hadn't happened yet. I knew about Dorian. I knew about the gala. And I knew you were going to die here. Lucian looked around the warehouse, then back at him. And you changed it. Kalen nodded. I didn't want you to die. Lucian's eyes softened. Why? Kalen swallowed. Because I care about you. The words were barely audible. Lucian stepped closer. Is that why you've changed? Kalen nodded. I was terrified. Of me? No. Kalen looked directly into his eyes. Of losing you. Something shifted in Lucian's expression. For months he had watched his husband transform from someone selfish and cruel into someone gentle, thoughtful, and brave. Now he finally understood why. Kalen had been fighting a future nobody else could see. Lucian reached for his hand. You saved my life. Kalen shook his head. I changed the story. Lucian gently squeezed his fingers. No, you changed me. Kalen looked up. Lucian's voice was quiet. Before you, I thought my life was already decided. I thought power was all I needed. But you made me want something else. What? Lucian stepped closer. You. Kalen's breath caught. I don't care what story you came from. I don't care what you were supposed to be. He lifted Kalen's hand. I only care about the man standing in front of me. Kalen's eyes filled with tears. Lucian smiled faintly. You didn't just rewrite my ending. You gave me a reason to want one. The weeks after the warehouse attack changed everything. Dorian was arrested for attempted murder, conspiracy, and his involvement with the rival Mafia families. The evidence Kalen had secretly collected made it impossible for anyone to protect him. The rival organizations collapsed soon after. And Lucian made a decision nobody expected. He began dismantling the violent side of his empire. At first, his advisors protested. You'll lose control. Lucian didn't even look up. Then I'll lose it. He shut down weapons operations, cut ties with corrupt officials, turned legitimate businesses over to independent management. For the first time, the Moretti name began appearing in newspapers for charity work and legal business rather than violence. Even the mansion changed. The servants no longer walked silently through the halls. Music played during dinner. People laughed. And breakfast became something Lucian and Kalen actually looked forward to. One morning, Kalen entered the dining room and stopped. Lucian was already there. He wore a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Kalen smiled. You look handsome. Lucian immediately looked away. Kalen laughed. Still blushing? I'm not. Your ears are red. They're not. They absolutely are, Lucian sighed. You enjoy embarrassing me. Very much? A servant turned away, desperately hiding a smile. Lucian noticed. "Everyone out." The servants immediately disappeared. Kaelin laughed harder. "You can't intimidate people just because your husband likes complimenting you." Lucian stood and walked toward him. "You're enjoying this too much." "Maybe." Lucian stopped in front of him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lucian reached for Kaelin's hand. "Do you regret changing everything?" Kaelin looked around the mansion, at the warmth, at the people who no longer lived in fear, at the man standing beside him. "No." Lucian smiled. "Even becoming my husband?" Kaelin raised an eyebrow. "I was already your husband." "Not really." Lucian's thumb brushed over his hand. "The man I married was someone else." Kaelin's heart softened. "And now?" Lucian looked directly into his eyes. "Now you're the man I choose." Kaelin smiled. The original story had never contained this moment. There had been no laughter, no warmth, no second chance, only betrayal, death, and regret. But Kaelin had changed it, and somehow, Lucian had changed with him. That night, they stood together on the mansion balcony beneath the city lights. Kaelin rested his head against Lucian's shoulder. "I think the story is finished." Lucian looked at him. "No." Kaelin smiled. "It's just beginning." Years later, Kaelin stood on the balcony of the Moretti mansion, watching the city lights shimmer below. Sometimes, he still remembered the life he had left behind, the novel, his death, the strange moment when he had opened his eyes as Aster Vale. Back then, survival had been his only goal. Now, survival felt like the smallest part of what he'd accomplished. The mansion was no longer cold. The servants laughed freely. The legitimate Moretti businesses had flourished. The violent side of Lucian's empire had disappeared. Dorian was serving his sentence, and the rival Mafia families that had once controlled the city were gone. Kaelin smiled when he heard footsteps behind him. "You disappeared." Lucian wrapped an arm around his waist. "I was thinking. That's dangerous." Kaelin laughed. "You look handsome tonight." Lucian immediately sighed. "Not again." Kaelin turned. His ears were already red. "You know, for the most feared Mafia boss in the city, you're terrible at accepting compliments." "I'm aware." Kaelin smiled. "Do you remember what I was like when we married?" Lucian's expression softened. "Unfortunately, I was awful." "You were impossible." Kaelin laughed. "That's fair." Lucian looked toward the city. "But I loved you anyway." Kaelin became quiet. Those words had never existed in the original novel. Neither had this balcony. Neither had the warm house behind them. Neither had the man standing beside him. Kaelin had entered another person's story, believing he needed to survive until the final chapter. Instead, he had changed every chapter that came after. He turned servants into family. He exposed the people who wanted him dead. He saved the man who was supposed to die. And somehow, the ruthless Mafia boss who once terrified an entire city had become the man who blushed whenever his husband complimented him. Lucian turned toward him. "Do you regret coming here?" Kaelin thought about the life he had lost. Then he looked at the life he had built. "No." "Not even once?" Kaelin shook his head. "You know why?" Lucian waited. "Because I thought I was given a second life so I could avoid dying." He reached for Lucian's hand. "But I was wrong. I was given a second life so I could finally choose how to live." Lucian pulled him closer. "And what did you choose?" Kaelin smiled. "You." Lucian's ears turned red again. Kaelin laughed. The original story had promised a tragic ending. Instead, Kaelin and Lucian had written their own. Because sometimes, you don't need to escape the story you're given. Sometimes you survive long enough to rewrite the ending.